And welcome, folks. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is the second session of Feminist Night School, so thank you so much for joining. We're so glad that you're able to come out and take the time this weekday evening to be here with us to get the updates on the state of justice. Last week, we talked about the state of protest. So if you missed that, it was a really rich, really deep conversation. We sent out the YouTube link to watch the recording, so definitely catch that. Tonight, we're talking about the state of justice. This is a webinar, so you won't be able to unmute yourself, but you can engage by doing the little reaction emojis. And definitely feel free to engage in the chat by sending us messages, saying hi, your name, where you're from, our agenda for tonight, I'm going to do this quick introduction for y'all. My name is Amanda Chavez Barnes. I'm Senior Director of Programs at Women's March, and I'm joined by my colleague, Aquib. Aquib, you want to say hey and introduce yourself real quick?
Hey y'all, Aquib Yacoob. I am calling in from
Sorry.
Houston, Texas, where we just had a big storm, and I'm our Chief of Staff at Women's March, behind the scenes supporting the incredible folks like Amanda and Tamika.
Yes, Akib is our man behind the curtain. So we're so glad that he was able to join us tonight. We're going to be sort of guiding you through this session tonight. And before I do the introductions for our speakers, I just wanted to ground us in the work that we're doing here as Women's March is to build a feminist movement. Using the definition from Bell Hooks, we know that feminism is a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, misogyny, and oppression. Knowing that, in order to end sexism and sexist exploitation, we have to end the broader system of domination. And we also have to fight to change our system from one where power is held by a few people to where power is held by the many. And so that's what we're here to do tonight. And one of those ways that we are building this movement, and one of the areas that we know that it's really important for us to focus on, is the judicial system. And we have two amazing speakers, Tamika Middleton, who's our very own managing director at Women's March, and Mike Sachs, senior advisor with Court Accountability, to give us some more updates. If you joined before, you know that he's very knowledgeable. We're really grateful to have him here to share his perspective and analysis on the court system, along with our feminist analysis and context and political grounding from our managing director, Tamika. Before we jump in and I hand it over to her, I wanted to do a quick refresher because we do have a bit of a complex federal court system. This is our friend Allison, who's living her best life in Barcelona right now. She did leave us with this great quick TikTok explainer about the courts and how they work. So I'm going to play that for us real quick.
Evidence, trying to apply legal principles to see who is right. Then above district courts, Court of Appeals. If the losing side has an issue with the previous ruling, basically thinking that their court wasn't fair, the trial was unjust, or some of the evidence wasn't presented correctly, they can appeal their decision. But appellate courts don't rehear the evidence and retry cases. They basically determine if the trial proceedings at the lower court were just, if they were conducted in a fair manner. If they decide that the law was applied correctly, then the ruling stays, and if they think it was not applied correctly, then the ruling is overturned. Next is the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the US. Again, if the losing side does not like how the Court of Appeals ruled on their case, they can bring it to a higher court, the highest court. This is incredibly rare, though, because justices spend months deciding on which cases to take and which to reject. And the Supreme Court has the final say. They are the final arbiter of the law. So for Mifepristone, we went from the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court.
All right, thank you, Allison, for that quick explainer. I'm actually going to hand it over to Tamika to get into our Women's March grounding and explainer when it comes to the way that we see the state of justice in our country today. So take it away, Tamika.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tamika Middleton. I am the managing director here at Women's March. And just so you all know, if you want to see that video from Allison, if you want to see the full length version of that video, go to our TikTok, go to our Instagram, where we have that explainer, and we have a number of other explainers about some cases. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today, there are some really cute and quick and dirty explainers on those cases and on those issues on our TikTok and on our Instagram. So I just wanted to name that. Thanks to most of them are Allison. So yeah, we are wanting to have this conversation here today. Women's March has over many years taken an interest in what's happening on the court level. This is not a new kind of battle that we're in, and we're not specifically in the battle because of what's happening with reproductive rights at the court level, but have been active going back to our Kaczmarek hearings, and will continue to be active around the courts and the ways in which justice does or does not get achieved in the court level. And so how we think about the courts, especially inside of the context of the feminist movement, is that historically courts have been a really important venue for marginalized communities to see relief and to improve the conditions inside of those communities in terms of civil rights. You know, Board versus Brown of Education. We know a number of those cases wherein Black communities in particular have received relief inside of the Supreme Court, inside of the federal court system of the United States. And the same is true for feminist movements and battles for women's rights. So we think about Griswold v. Connecticut, which was a very important lawsuit that talked about how access to birth control and the right for people to use birth control was guaranteed because of the right to privacy. We talk about the way sexual harassment, the way working hours for women. These are some of the cases and some of the issues that were resolved inside of the Supreme Court as women were fighting for fair treatment inside of the workplace. And of course, Roe v. Wade was a case that was heard in front of the Supreme Court such that women could improve the conditions of their lives, right? And so this has been a really important tool and tactic, especially for those communities that were not considered in the original writing of the Constitution, right? And those communities that were marginalized for a number of reasons, white supremacy, patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so over many generations, that has been one of the tools alongside protests, alongside electoral struggles. Utilizing the legal system has been a really important tool for social justice over many years. What we are seeing currently is the ways in which the courts, and especially in post-Trump presidency era, have been changed such that it becomes less likely for marginalized communities and much harder for marginalized communities to receive relief through the courts. And so you can go ahead and you can start sharing slides, Amanda. In particular, we know that we are in a moment wherein not just the courts generally, but the Supreme Court in particular is under scrutiny. People in across the country are questioning the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, right? And it's especially so coming after the Dobbs decision of June 24, 2022, when Roe v. Wade was effectively overturned. But what we know is that it's not just happening at the Supreme Court level. Yes, those seats are appointed by partisan, political actors, right? But those appointments also happen all the way down that line that Allison laid out for us at the appeals court level and also at the district court level. And so for us at Women's March, we believe that the Dobbs ruling signified or signaled an open season on attacks on our rights and freedoms via the court system. And one of the cases that we think really illustrate how this has happened is the attack on Mifepristone, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the United States, or the FDA. And so if you recall last year in March, the hearings began in March, but in 2022, an organization that was incorporated in Amarillo, Texas, filed a lawsuit in the North District Courts in Texas and Amarillo, challenging the FDA's approval of Mifepristone. Now, of course, Mifepristone has been approved for use for more than 20 years. What we recognized was that what was happening is a tactic that is called forum shopping, wherein these organizations, in particular conservative organizations, selected specific districts where they would get the judges that they wanted, that they believed would rule in their favor. And this was really, really obvious and evident inside of the Mifepristone case. And so what happened in that case also, that for a number of reasons, people were choosing the North District of Texas. One, because a judge there, Matthew Kacsmaryk, who we know was an ultra-conservative, Trump-appointed judge, is in that district. And if you file a lawsuit in that district, it is highly likely that that is the judge that you will receive. And another reason that people were choosing the Northern District Court in Amarillo is a small city in the panhandle of Texas that is a bit isolated. There's not a lot of press. It wasn't easy for press and for media and for a lot of attention to get on this case, on these cases that are happening inside of this court here. And for Women's March, what felt like was important to us was that we made sure that they were not able to hide what they were doing by filing this lawsuit in Amarillo. And thankfully, we had a really strong crew of women's marchers in Amarillo who were ready to march and mobilize in March of 2023. And so, yes, so Matthew Kacsmaryk heard this case. A number of things happened. One was that he tried to have rulings again. Once the word was out that this was happening, he tried to have hearings that no one was able to know about. He pulled both sides into chambers and asked them to not tell anyone that they were going to have these hearings on this particular day. He did not want press in the room when people found out about it. He tried to restrict access to the media. This was one of those things where it becomes very obvious that the courts are compromised in a really particular way and are unaccountable, and that judges are acting as politicians, are being political actors as opposed to being unbiased in their rulings. And so Kacsmaryk ruled in that case, and he ruled to suspend the approval of Mifepristone, and the case from there went to Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Louisiana. The Fifth Circuit has a number of Trump appointees. A number of cases go through this same circuit from Texas or Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi to the Fifth Circuit, including Texas SB 8, if you remember. That legislation is what has resulted in the lack of access to abortion in Texas, also follow the same trajectory to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where it is heavily populated by Trump appointees. And that in that court, they ruled to continue to suspend some of the access to Mifepristone. And now the case has gone to the Supreme Court's hearing. This was May of last year when the Fifth Circuit hearing, a really complicated ruling that was also complicated by other cases around the access to Mifepristone in other states. And so all of those have gone to the Supreme Court now, and Supreme Court hearings just happened in April of this year. And if you see here, these are some of the actions that we took outside of the Supreme Court just a few months ago. And so now we're waiting to hear what is going to happen in that case with Mifepristone. The other case that we're keeping our eye on as relates to reproductive health, reproductive rights, and women's access to healthcare is the EMTALA case. EMTALA stands for Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. The case itself is the United States versus Idaho. The EMTALA is a piece of legislation that was passed in the 80s that guaranteed that any hospital that is receiving Medicare has to then treat folks who have an emergency medical condition. And so when Dobbs fell, the Department of Health declared that abortion in many cases is covered under EMTALA if there is an emergency situation. While the state of Idaho, shortly after the fall of Roe, was about to enact a ban that said that, even in cases of emergency, we will not be giving people abortions. The United States filed a lawsuit against the state of Idaho saying that they had to provide abortions in those cases. And so that case just also had hearings, and these are also images from some actions around EMTALA. And so we're waiting on the rulings on those, and we're thinking those will come down in the next month. The other thing I want to name is that there's also action and activity happening inside of state courts. It's not just federal courts where these attacks are happening. So for instance, in Alabama, people are familiar with the hearings that are with the rulings in Alabama, the cases that are threaten access to IVF treatment. In Arizona, there's an abortion ban that has been on the books since the 1800s, and their courts were also hearing that and enacting old abortion bans as well. And then also Oregon, Iowa, Indiana, South Carolina, and Florida state courts have also issued rulings denying the right to abortion. And I want to speak specifically to my home state, South Carolina, where the rulings in the South Carolina Supreme Court in particular demonstrate how unreliable the courts are, because just within a 7-month period, first the Supreme Court issued a ruling that said that abortion was protected in the state constitution because of a privacy clause. And then 7 months later said that that privacy clause did not include or protect abortion. And so completely conflicting rulings. With the first ruling, it struck down an abortion ban. And with the second ruling, it actually upheld a very similar abortion ban. So it really speaks to how the ways in which the court system is unreliable, in particular for marginalized communities. And pass it back to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Tamika. I wanted to remind folks that if you have questions, please chime in. Your engagement is what makes this more meaningful, because some of us are more in the weeds than others, but all of us are kind of a little bit in the weeds with some of this stuff. If you have questions, please definitely drop them in the Q&A or comments, put them in the chat, and we'll try to incorporate that as we go along. But we wanted to sort of start off with that overview and those examples, and then move into updates specifically around, the other case that we have been keeping our eye on. And we're really grateful to Mike Sachs from Court Accountability for joining us. He's part of the team that spearheaded the Justice Can't Wait campaign that we've been amplifying around the Trump immunity case, with the demand that the Supreme Court issue a ruling by May 20th. And as you know, it's now May 22nd, so it's time for some updates. Just wanted to ask Mike, real quick, if you could give us a refresher on the immunity case, just sort of an overview of where we've been and how we got here and where we are now.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. Mike Sachs, Senior Advisor, Court Accountability. Thank you all for watching this evening and being here for the webinar. So we're talking about the case before the Supreme Court in which former President Trump is saying that he has criminal immunity from prosecution, presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, specifically to the crimes he's been charged with for election interference for the 2020 election, connected to trying to overturn the election and inciting an insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. Special Counsel Jack Smith with the Department of Justice charged former President Trump with 4 criminal charges in the District Court of the District of Columbia, one of those 94 district courts that you heard about in that TikTok earlier. Also charged him with document tampering, classified document withholding in a court in Florida that is presided over by a judge that has showed herself pretty much from the start to be in Trump's pocket and auditioning to be the next Supreme Court justice under a Trump administration. But that's neither here nor there for the moment. But those are the 2 prosecutions, criminal prosecutions, that have been brought against former President Trump in the federal courts. Pretty early on, in the DC District Court under Judge Tanya Chutkan, Trump put forward a motion to dismiss, saying that he is immune from criminal prosecution based on some made-up theory of presidential immunity by virtue of his being president when he was allegedly criming. The Judge Chutkan, pretty quickly said, get out of here. That makes no sense. That doesn't exist. That thing you're saying, can't find anything for that in the text, history, precedent, purpose of the Constitution. Get out of here. And clearly this is a delay tactic. Trump then appealed the case to the DC Circuit, one of the 13 courts of appeals that you saw in the TikTok we watched earlier in our court system, our federal court system. But as he was appealing that ruling to the appeals court, Special Counsel Smith then went straight to the Supreme Court saying, let's just cut to the chase here, because if you want to have the last word on this, you can answer it right now. You don't need any intermediate court to answer it beforehand. You give us the answer so we can move on with this trial, especially so we can have the trial finished before Election Day, because whether the former president and now the nominee, at the time the presumptive nominee for the Republican ticket for 2024, if he gets convicted of interference crimes and federal crimes, it'll be a nice thing for voters to know when they're going to the polls in November. The Supreme Court, instead of saying, okay, we will hear this case and we will immediately decide very quickly on what to do so that the trial can get started in time, I think by March 4th, which is what Judge Chutkan's timeline asserted. Instead, the Supreme Court said, no, we're going to let this play out in normal fashion. And we didn't hear any dissents from anyone in the court. This was just a one-line order saying, go forward with the DC Circuit. So the DC Circuit moved quick, and they heard argument in January, and within a couple of weeks, they had a decision out in February saying, yeah, no, come on. There's no such thing as presidential immunity for criming while in office. No. It was a unanimous decision. 3-judge panel, 2 Biden appointees and 1 George H.W. Bush appointee. And all 3 joined this without any concurrence, any dissent. And then they said, you have a week, Trump, to go to the Supreme Court, because we know you're trying to drag your feet so that by the time a trial gets started, it'll be too late for a decision or for a verdict to come in before Election Day. So go, run, don't walk to the Supreme Court and ask if they want to take this case. So that's what Trump did, and the Supreme Court waited a few weeks until they decided, instead of just denying the case, the DC Circuit handled it pretty comprehensively. The court said, yeah, we're going to take it. A couple weeks after Trump came to them asking them to take it. So the clock was ticking and ticking and ticking. And then they set oral argument for the day after the last day of oral arguments of the Supreme Court term in late April. And that's when we heard the justices, for the first time, muse over why they even bothered to take this case when it was comprehensively and conclusively answered by the lower court. And it turns out there are at least 5 justices of the Republican appointees who are presidential immunity criming curious and want to at least delineate perhaps a possibility that there is some zone in which a president who is criming in office can never be held accountable for those crimes. And if there aren't 5 votes for that, there seem to be 5 votes at least to delay and send this case back to the lower court for the lower court to decide this issue, at which point, when the lower courts decide against Trump, then he will then appeal up the chain again. All to the effect that when and if there is a decision, it will very likely be too late for Judge Chutkan to get the trial going in time to have a verdict submitted to the jury and a jury with the verdict before Election Day, for we the people to understand what's going on here and have full information of the Republican nominee for president. Now, May 20th was when the Justice Can't Wait, justicecan'twait.org, you should go check it out. There's lots of information there. The Justice Can't Wait campaign said that there needs to be a decision from the Supreme Court on this question of presidential immunity. Why May 20th? Because that was the outer band of the timeline in which the decision could then get the case sent right back down to the district court for the trial to proceed to finish before Election Day. But also, it was 25 days from the argument to May 20th, when that same timeline is the same timeline it took for the Supreme Court to decide the ballot question when Trump got thrown off the Colorado ballot by the Colorado Supreme Court for being an insurrectionist, and that's banned under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. 25 days after the Supreme Court heard that argument, they came back saying, nah, Trump, you can get back on the ballot. And that was a unanimous decision with the same 5 Republican appointees who were immunity curious at the argument in April. Those same 5 proceeded then to go beyond what the other justices wanted to do and gut Congress's power to enforce this insurrection clause. So what we've had so far are 2 cases in which this Supreme Court, at least 5 justices, have shown themselves to be sympathetic to delaying justice to deny democracy. Because that's the threat that Trump poses should he win in November. It's not just a threat to all the marginalized folk that were targeted throughout his first administration, but it's a threat to American representative democracy as we know it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. What does it mean that, just to reiterate, because I feel like the stakes of this are so high, but what implications does this have for the legitimacy of the court? And what implications does this have for the upcoming election?
Yeah, so the court's legitimacy. Already, the delays that the court took at every turn, there's some plausible deniability for following normal processes and staying out of politics. But ultimately, the argument that we heard almost a month ago ripped off that mask that there was any sense that this court was dispassionately addressing this question. In addition, we've seen the past couple days, last week and this evening, I see from Barbara Solo in the chat, what can be done about those clear violations of judicial ethics? We already know about Justice Thomas, with his wife Ginny Thomas being intimately involved with the Stop the Steal movement. Again, steal was a lie, the election wasn't stolen, and intimately involved with engineering the mobs that ultimately ended up on the Capitol grounds on January 6th. But now you have Justice Alito, who has been an even more reliable partisan, an even more reliable Trumpist than Thomas on the court. The New York Times is revealing that he flew an upside-down American flag days after the insurrection of 2021, when it was clear to everyone that that flag was the same symbol that was being flown by the insurrectionists at the Capitol those days earlier. So you have someone who showed open sympathy on his property for the January 6th insurrection, now sitting in judgment of this person now seeking to regain the White House. Then this evening, there was another flag incident that was reported about Justice Alito's beach house on the Jersey Shore, where they were flying a Christian nationalist flag, again, associated with the January 6th insurrectionists. So not one, but two insurrectionist flag incidents with Justice Alito. So what can be done about that? You can pressure Dick Durbin, of the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, to hold hearings and investigations on who knew what and when they knew it about these insurrection flying flags with Justice Alito, whether he and Thomas themselves were key to taking the case and delaying the case, and demanding that they recuse, if not be forced to resign from the court for these deep ethical lapses. So that's one answer to your question about the legitimacy of the court. But what we're going to see this term, whenever this decision comes down, and it could come down tomorrow, it could come down in a few weeks, we're likely going to get a decision not to decide, a punt, by a majority of justices who are in it to delay this trial from occurring, so to maximize former President Trump's ability to win the election, the Electoral College, let's face it, the Electoral College in November.
Oh, okay, yes. I was hearing about that for the first time. I thought that it was hard to be surprised, but the Christian nationalist flag, that's a new level. Okay. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I don't want to put you on the spot because I know we hadn't really talked about this that much, but just, for the cases that we're watching, the other cases that the Supreme Court is yet to rule on, that Tamika mentioned, Mifepristone and EMTALA cases. In your opinion, what should we be prepared for?
Okay. This is something where the bottom line answers to these cases will, I think, come as a relief to the people in this webinar. On the Mifepristone case, the court is very likely to say that those plaintiffs, the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, which is a made-up group that formed itself near the courthouse in Amarillo, Texas, for the judge that will automatically be a rubber stamp for their agenda, the Supreme Court is very likely by a lopsided number ruling that that group did not have standing to bring this lawsuit. But waiting in the wings is Texas, who is trying to intervene in this lawsuit and has already been given the green light to intervene by Judge Kaczmarek in Amarillo to move forward. And this Supreme Court is likely then to agree that Texas has standing to intervene in this suit, where the doctors themselves did not. So we could very well have this case come right back up to the Supreme Court in a year. Now, if Trump wins and he's able to overhaul his administration with all political appointees, his political appointees won't wait for that case to come forward. They will move to ban or revoke the FDA approval of Mifepristone, and then look to criminalize the mailing of abortion information, elements, instruments, under a zombie 1873 Victorian era law called the Comstock Act, which has never been used to enforce and criminalize abortion. An incoming Trump administration would be looking to do that in ways that, they wouldn't need to rely on the courts to do it. So that's one thing that's happening. So the immediate answer for the Mifepristone case is that the Supreme Court will likely throw it out and throw out the challenge, at least this immediate one. The EMTALA case, that's a little weirder. At oral arguments, I think there was the expectation that because the court was going to throw out the Mifepristone case, they were going to balance the ledger and side with Idaho. They still very well may side with Idaho, but there was some rumblings from Justice Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh to try to harmonize the straight up ban on abortion in Idaho, which only has exception for like a woman on death's door, a pregnant person on death's door, versus the EMTALA, which allows any doctor in an emergency room and frankly requires a doctor in an emergency room upon receiving a patient to stabilize that patient with whatever treatment is necessary. So if someone comes in which they need an abortion as a stabilizing procedure for the emergency that brought them to the hospital, then the doctor has to administer that. Now there's daylight, right? Because the stabilizing thing might not be to stabilize them from dying. It might just be to stabilize, it might be not just to stabilize them for another serious health issue. But short of being on death's door, Idaho says, nope, sorry, can't do that. But Barrett and Kavanaugh seem to want to sort of send a message, a wink, wink, nod, nod down to Idaho to say, tell your doctors that if they comply with EMTALA, they will not be at risk of prosecution under our ban. Now, the bigger picture is the ban still survives, right? If EMTALA can apply to emergency rooms in Idaho's hospitals under the Idaho's straight ban, that's just people going to the emergency room. That's an important group of people, but it's a vast minority of those who would be seeking abortions absent this flat ban, and who would still be criminalized under this ban from seeking such. So that's that. That's the landscape for that. And what we'll see actually by the end of the Supreme Court is you're going to see they've shaped their docket in a way to make it sound as though they're not as crazy and as extreme as the wild ones on the Fifth Circuit. To generate headlines so that when they have one case that seems to be anti-gun, one case that seems to be pro-gun, one case that seems to want to destroy our health and safety regulations, the other one that seems to want to uphold it. That's meant to generate headlines that, oh, maybe these guys aren't so bad after all. But every single case, no matter what the bottom line, whether there's a win or lose for either side, they're going to be pushing the law rightward in a way that would have not been pushed had it not been for these people being on the court specifically. Now, one more thing. I see Tamika just came back on. Hey, Tamika. One thing I want to note her presentation, which was a very good presentation. Those moments where there's a sense that the courts will save us for marginalized communities, that was a blip in time of the Supreme Court's history, of American history, probably from 1954 to the early 1970s. And since the early 70s, but for the historical accident of bad vetting and bad advice that Republicans were getting from their own, they were unable to more quickly effectuate the counter-revolution that we're seeing now. So all the precedents that were rights preserving, freedoms protecting, that people in this chat came to embrace and came to fight for, they were living on borrowed time for decades. What ensured those rights, even Brown versus Board of Education came out, it was symbolic, but it wasn't enforced. It was federal law, acts of Congress, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Those laws were the ones that gave teeth. And so to bring this back to the Justice Can't Wait campaign, one of the taglines for Justice Can't Wait was, we cannot let justice delayed become democracy destroyed. And that was meant to be geared towards talking to the justices. We won't let you do this. Now the justices are doing that. The emphasis changes. We, the people, cannot let democracy or justice delayed become democracy destroyed. We cannot. It's about how we're going to understand this court as an enemy of representative democracy, as an enemy of self-determination, as a people that, as a majority that said in Dobbs, women are not without their political electoral power, go to the states and make it happen. While then messing with what the states are trying to, messing with the states and the plebiscite and the democracy in the states, they're trying to effectuate and codify their rights, saying, no, you need 60% to pass a constitutional amendment, not 50%. Or, we're going to really further gerrymander our state so that a majority of you who want to codify abortion rights by law can't. That's what's happening now. It's a fight for democracy. And democracy is on the side of the people who are in this room right now. It is. So it's a matter of unrigging it. It's a matter of getting at those who are trying to rig it. And that's happening in the Supreme Court. It's happening in the lower federal courts. It's happening to an extent in state courts, but there is hope. You mentioned the Arizona law, the snapback Arizona 1864 law. The Arizona Supreme Court, which was expanded and packed to ensure conservative dominance in that state, even though the states turned bluish. They said that full ban from the territorial days that was pushed forward by a underage, pretty much a pedophile who went state to state being a predator. That still stands. But what do the people of Arizona do? They found a way to say, nope, sorry, court, no, we're going to bring some of our rights back. Now, those rights are still not as expansive as they were before Dobbs, but it's the people and seeking legislative power that was able to effectuate change. So the courts are not going to save us, and there's a very brief blip in time in which people could rely on the courts to protect rights. It's democracy now. That's what prior.
I know we're going to transition a little bit into to Mike, to your point, right? What the people, everyday folks on this call can do, right? Yeah. But before we do that, I'm wondering if Tamika, you can speak a little bit. It seems like right now, and this is a question from El Perry in the chat, that there's a war on women, right? Why is this? Why the hell is this happening right now, right? And why is it this particular issue? Why is focusing on women and reproductive health the entry point for a lot of the far right?
I mean, here's what I would offer is, that we should examine, similar to what Mike was saying around, the kind of history, the long history of what's happened in the courts. If there has been a time when there has not been, where there have not been attacks on women's freedoms, where, this, and in particular, especially as we look at women who are more on the margins, that these sort of attacks have always existed. I think seeing what at Women's March we are trying to navigate, we feel like it's important for us to navigate, is in particular a rise of authoritarianism and the ways in which attacks on certain communities facilitate that rise of authoritarianism. If folks have looked at and seen Project 2025, which is the conservative movement's plan for the next conservative administration, there's entire segments of that document that are specifically about trying to dismantle the feminist movement, specifically about attacking women's rights, women's health, et cetera, in particular to advance the politics of conservative authoritarian politics. And so as we are thinking about how we need to move forward and how we need to fight back, I think what we need to really pull back a little bit for ourselves and say, yes, there are attacks on women. And also, while there are attacks on women, there are these specific attacks on LGBTQ folks. There are specific attacks on democracy. There's, and these attacks are not disconnected. That they're really, when we think about the big picture of the attacks, that it is really these attacks that feel isolated. Like it feels like repro health is like a specific thing that's being attacked, and it is. But if we take a moment to pull out, we can see that there's a broader context in which there is this rise of authoritarianism. If we think about the history of Women's March, right, that Women's March was really born out of this moment wherein there was a fear of, a rise of fascism, a rise of authoritarianism in the aftermath of the election of Donald Trump. And so that has not gone away. That threat has not gone away. And so I would say that is sort of the bigger picture that we're thinking about inside of this moment, that it is not there is not a new war on women, and fascism isn't new inside of this country, right? But there is a context in which there is a rise, a spread outside of just those of us who have lived in the South. For me, I've lived in the South my entire life, in multiple states, and we have seen what authoritarian what can happen to marginalized communities inside of those contexts. So yeah, that would be my those are my thoughts on that. And I just wanted to add to what Mike was saying around that kind of moment in history, and what sustained and what pushed those changes to happen. And yes, the acts of Congress, and also good people, a very strong people-powered movement, right? That there is no win, there are no changes in our context and our conditions, in the lived conditions of our people without our people, without a strong protest movement without a multi-tiered, multi-tactical, coordinated strategy to fight back and to win. So that is electoral, that is policy, that is in the streets, that is cultural, that is all those tactics that must be powered by a mass movement of folks who are coming together and saying, we will not stand for the removal and the restricting of our rights. And so that is what we are here for. That is our mandate as Women's March, is to build and to continue to power and to fuel that kind of mass people power movement.
Thank you so much, Tamika. Yes, amen to all of that. I see all the applause because I think people are feeling it. Yes, you're speaking to our crowd. We love our women's marchers because, we know what time it is. It is about the movement, is about collective action. And I just want to give a quick plug for 2 actions that we wanted to ask y'all to take. First, Women's March and Court Accountability, we're just talking about, what can we do in addition to voting? One of the questions here was like, how can we, hold these folks accountable, hold these judicial officials accountable? Of course, we know that we need to vote and make sure that people know that this is an issue that's on the ballot, that these justices right now, federal judges don't have a way to be removed easily. You have to be impeached or whatever, like through Congress. There's not oversight. So we need to be considering, what the way we're voting and what that's going to mean for the future, but also what are some things that we can do now? And we came up with this idea to launch a court watch program. You might be familiar with this activity, something that people often do in local municipal courts at a lower level for lower level criminal cases, but we don't know of any court watch for the federal system. And so I'm going to drop a link in the chat so that y'all can sign up. Oh yeah, Aquib, you already did it. See, this is why Aquib is the man behind the curtain. He's right on time. So yeah, please go and sign up for that if this is something that you want to stay engaged about. We need people to not tune out. It seems complicated, but it's actually once you start paying attention, it's actually unfortunately quite simple a lot of ways, because we see the connections and we see the impetus of where everything is going. So what we want you to do is join this, sign up, and we'll connect all of you together. And we'll also be connecting with you to find out how we can, actually observe federal courts. We talked about how there's so many district courts all around the country. What is the closest one to you? Are you able to go and sit in and be there in person? Or if you can't be there in person, are you able to listen? Sometimes there are broadcasts, live streams. So we need as many people paying attention to this as we can. We need them to know that we're paying attention. And we need all of us together doing it because individually we have purpose. As Stacey Abrams said, I'm from Georgia too, from the South. Individually we have purpose, together we have power. And we know it's our responsibility to be the ones at this point, like Mike was saying, it's on us now. It's we the people who've got to take this up. We can't wait for someone to save us. We definitely can't wait for the courts to save us. And then we also want to invite you. You should have gotten an email about this, but we wanted to invite you if you're interested in moving from activism to organizing in a deeper way and really building whether it's digital organizing fan communities, or field, out streets in real life organizing. We invite you to join the Feminist Organizing School that Tamika and I are going to be leading throughout the rest of the year. It's a cohort that will join together to learn the fundamentals of feminist organizing. And you'll have the opportunity to choose to concentrate in one of those tracks I mentioned: digital organizing, field organizing, or fandom organizing. And actually get support while you practice and flex your organizing muscles. We'll be there to give feedback and guidance along the way. So if you've been wanting to be more deeply engaged, this is your opportunity. We invite you to go ahead and submit an application, and the deadline for that is May 31st. So we hope that you will consider applying for Feminist Organizing School and definitely sign up for a Court Watch. And with that, I will let's use the rest of our time to talk through anything else that has come up as a question, or any other discussion points or comments we needed to get clear on before we close out this session.
I see one question from Abby in the chat that kind of looks a bit forward, right? Sage is to win. He gets more MAGA judges down the line at SCOTUS. I know there are two folks who are up for retirement at the very least. What's next, right? What are they coming for next? What we should we be prepared for? And what should be on our radars right now? And thanks, Abby, for the question.
I guess I'll take this one. You know, if Trump wins, I think, frankly, the least of our concerns will be the courts. It's curtains down on American democracy. And even if the courts say, well, you know, you can't do that, that's a step too far. It won't matter. It won't. But let's pretend as if it does. Let's pretend as though you know what the courts will be doing next. You know, say Sotomayor has to step down for some reason. Say Alito and Roberts and Thomas all step down because they're old. They're going to be older. That means that we will be getting, you know, 2 to 4 more judges picked from the same ilk as the Fifth Circuit or as Judge Cannon or as Judge Kaczmarek, who are all in on this fascist project across every issue area that you can imagine, beyond. So every issue that you can think of right now that's, you know, that's being championed in Florida by Ron DeSantis, that'll get nationalized. You will have fetal personhood on the table if you want to think about reproductive rights. So the Dobbs decision was an old-fashioned federalism decision. Oh, it's a state's issue. It's not, you know, it's not a constitutional issue. The Constitution says nothing about abortion one way or the other. It's up to the states to decide. But the vanguard, they think that they believe in the mirror image of Roe versus Wade, in which the Constitution doesn't protect abortion rights, but bans abortion straight up to the 14th Amendment's protection of life, liberty, and property, and putting you know, fetal personhood above the health, life of women. In that kind of clash, you will have a theocratic veto of any anti-discrimination law. We're seeing some of that now, but more on steroids. You'll have the complete evisceration of the Establishment Clause so that there is no separation of church and state. You will have an attack on the fundamental core of right to privacy, which gave us the protection for contraception, right to contraception. These things are all on the table in a second Trump administration. And frankly, you know what? They're kind of on the table should Trump lose for, you know, whoever generic Republican might win in 2028, because these are not now Trumpy judges. These are judges all aligned with the Republican Party as it exists, and the biggest donors of the Republican Party and the biggest ideological movers of the Republican Party, from Leonard Leo to the Koch brothers on down. This is now party orthodoxy, that the judges would have been the same under Nikki Haley. And whoever comes to power, if someone comes to power in 2028, should you know, whoever runs on the Democratic side not prevail then. So to roundabout answer your question, I say curtains down wins in 2024 this year. But even if he doesn't, the courts are still going to be a major issue, running interference on a second Biden administration, and going to be a major issue for whatever comes afterwards in 2028. The courts are our main policy making and breaking institution in this country. And that's a shame of how it is right now. And there needs to be a people aware and awake to reassert their democratic rights so that they can get a government, an elected government, that will be able to reshape the courts in the image of the American people and what the American people want.
So, Mike, can I ask maybe a follow-up question to that, right?
Yes.
I think growing up, we talked a little about this last week, right? Growing up in school, we hear about the delicate balance, right, of the three systems of government. You have the White House, Congress, and we know that that's healthiest when there's light tension between the three of them. With one, possibly two of those checks compromised, what becomes of that delicate balance? And what do we then do, right? And I think that's what a lot of folks are hearing from in the chat and in our conversations, right? Like, this thing that we learned since we were little kids is not there anymore. What's next?
Yeah, we have been in a moment of judicial supremacy. And frankly, this notion of judicial, sorry for the toilet flush background, that's one of my child going to the bathroom. But we're in a moment of judicial supremacy. And we've been in that moment of judicial supremacy for a long time. And it's not the fault of the Trump judges. They're picking up on a courts will save us mentality that that our side, if you will, had for a very long time, and they're weaponizing it. Right now, due to the Electoral College, the Senate filibuster, and the Senate's inherent malapportionment, and extreme partisan gerrymandering, we have all these sorts of choke points towards a representative democratic political government. And into the breach has stepped the Supreme Court. When Republicans are in power, they've recognized that the numbers are not in favor of their staying in democratic power, small d democratic power. So what you saw throughout the Bush administration and the Trump administration especially was an attempt to empower courts as the main policy making and breaking body. All Republicans need is tax cuts, right? They effectuate every other parts of their political agenda through the courts. And they have these politicians in robes asserting their judicial supremacy over any democratic, small or big capital D democratic policy coming out of the White House or Congress. They're the veto point. They're meant to zombify the Republican Party when it ceases to be politically relevant. So the question is, how do we get out of it? You're seeing in the States some flickers, flames of hope, frankly, of Wisconsin and their Supreme Court, Wisconsin and their government looking to get rid of its extreme partisan gerrymandering. But then you see in a state like North Carolina going in the opposite direction. But their courts are democratically elected. And it's about people turning out and knowing the stakes so that their courts in the state level cannot recreate what's happened on the national level here with life tenure judges that can only be removed through impeachment. So I can't, unfortunately, my answer isn't that I don't have a clear answer for how to get out of this problem right now. But we're in this moment now where there's been a clear arrogation of power, collection of power by the judicial branch to perpetuate political power for their allies and in their own institution at the expense of the will of the people. That's where we are right now. And the only way out of that is through it. The only way out of that, I used to say, vote harder isn't a policy because the only way out of that is robes are out of that. So I used to say, but at this point, like, we know there's the people power. We've seen the states after Dobbs. We've seen it in states that you wouldn't think you'd see it, and we've seen it. And if that energy can be used towards the focus on the Supreme Court as well, and the federal courts, and understanding that they only change when we make them change, that's imperative to understand.
Whew. I know we're a little bit over time. Thank you all so much for hanging in. It's been a really important conversation. Thanks so much, Mike, for joining us. Thank you so much, Tamika, for joining us and sharing your feminist genius. I just wanted to say, if folks just wanted to leave us with, sort of one message for folks to take with them. I know it's been a lot, but is there something that you just, would like to sort of sum up, like the state of justice? What do you want people to take away from this session?
I'll go first. We are the keeper of our rights. Courts, they're not going to protect our rights. They're just as political and politically accountable or politically malleable than our legislatures, who are actually accountable to us. We are the keeper of our rights. We shouldn't outsource them to a few. We have to hold them for the many.
Thank you so much, Mike. What I would say here is, we beat the drum at Women's March around having a vision for the feminist future we want to see and building the movement that takes us there. And so I think that, that feels important, because what we know is that the other side has a vision. They've called it Project 2025. They got a vision and a plan. And so our side has to have a vision, and we have to have a strategy, and we have to have people coming in, everyday people taking up the mantle and building our collective power to bring about the world that we want to see. And so we invite you all. I appreciate the ask in the chat. What is the action we can take? We invite you all to join us. All summer long, we'll be doing stuff. All the rest of the year, we got big things popping. You got the Court Watch sign up. You got the link to go get involved with Justice. Can't wait. If you want to train up and get deeper and really, build your skill, build your political leadership, apply for the Feminist Organizing School. We'll be continuing to do these Feminist Night Schools throughout the year. So that people can get a really good, not just a really good lay of the land, which is the phase of these night schools that we're in right now, which is what is the lay of the land? Can we have a collective assessment of what we're fighting against? And then the next phase of this thing, y'all, and I hope y'all are ready for it, is how do we fight? What are the actions we can take? Because yes, come to March, but also to drop a banner, but also organize a die-in, but also do a petition campaign. And so that's the next phase of these night schools. And so I hope y'all continue to join us. I hope y'all tell your people, tell a friend to come get with the home team so we can build, a powerful, winning feminist movement, legible feminist movement in the United States.